Hello, everyone. We are back with Chapter 11, Part 2, 11.4 through 6?
Yeah.
Yeah. First, learning objective. Describe the process.
You didn't introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am Mrs. Womack.
Mr. Shaw.
I thought you knew that already.
We're trying to make money on YouTube from this, so
Describe the process of lawmaking in Congress.
let's do it.
Okay, so the lawmaking process, kind of steps of it, agenda setting, committees at work, which we talked about committees in that last video. It's where most of the work is done. Committees at work, not only with legislation, but then with oversight, floor debate, and the filibuster, and then unorthodox lawmaking. I'm assuming we're going to go into more detail of that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was just the intro.
Yeah, got it. Ooh, this is a bear.
What a nightmare.
Ugh.
Okay, so let's start with saying that this is in your book.
Yeah.
And you should definitely copy this down. I
Yeah.
would say have this readily available, not just for the quiz and the test. I mean, this is really important to know all of the things that go into how a bill becomes a law. I would just say, in general, though, make sure you know that it is complicated.
Very complicated.
Okay, so let's just get started. So it can start in either house unless it's a tax bill, then it has to start in the house. It is introduced. You'll notice that a lot of it is the same, so that's kind of an easy thing for you. So then it's going to go to, they assign it to the appropriate committee where they put it, it goes to the subcommittee, they do research, they perform studies, and then they will revise the bill, debate the bill, and then vote on the bill, and then they'll go to the regular committee, the full committee, where they do the exact same thing. Mostly the research is done. They don't do the research anymore, but they will debate, they will revise, and then vote, and then it goes to the Rules Committee in the House. You'll notice this is the first thing that is not the same. So the Rules Committee, they issue a rule governing debate, like how long it's going to be debated, stuff like that. And then it goes to the full House floor. I'm sorry.
Can we give an example of, we talked about committees in the last video, and I think I gave the example of education or something?
I said agriculture.
Oh, yeah, agriculture. What would be a subcommittee of that, though? Give an example of what a subcommittee would be. If it would be something, let's say there's a committee on agriculture, and then there's something very specific about...
So probably ones that, genetically modified organisms
yes.
would probably be one.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily, and then maybe one that is specifically about the effects of farmers.
Yes. So it just depends on what the bill is covering, and if there is a subcommittee for that committee. Otherwise, it would just stay in the big committee.
Correct. So after the Rules Committee, it goes to the full House where they do the same thing. They debate. They revise. I think they can revise.
If the Rules Committee says they can, they can.
Yeah, they can revise if the Rules Committee says it's okay, and then they vote. So after that, again, we're assuming it hasn't been to the Senate yet, then it goes to the Senate. So and then they do the exact same thing that I just talked about, with the only difference being the leadership of both parties. They schedule debate on the bill, and this is where the majority leader comes in handy, because he or she can just say, nope, we're not going to debate this bill.
Don't even care.
And there's really nothing that the minority leader or anybody in the Senate can do about it. So, the COVID stuff is really interesting too, just because it's tough to get through both parts of Congress. So back in the summer, the House had posted, they had passed a bill, and the Senate didn't even debate it, because they weren't ready to yet, or insert whatever reason to here. But yeah, that's just how it shows you how powerful the majority leader is. And then after the leadership determines what's going to happen, then they go to the full Senate. They do the exact same thing. They debate, they amend, they vote. And then if there's two different bills, then it goes to the conference committee. And then the conference, so again, this is the same bill. If there's any differences between the same bill that both houses pass, it goes to the conference committee, like we talked about in the last video, and then they iron out the differences and then send it back to the House and Senate for final vote. Gosh. And then after that, assuming they both approve the new versions, the ironed out versions, then bill is sent to the president. The president can then sign the bill, veto the bill, or hold the bill for 10 days. And then if he signs the bill or holds the bill for 10 days and Congress is still in session, the bill is now law. If he vetoes the bill dies. But actually, it goes back to Congress if he vetoes it, and they can override it with a 2/3 vote from both houses. Or if he holds the bill for 10 days, and then at the end of those 10 days, Congress is not in session, that's called a pocket veto, and that the bill just dies then. It does not go back to Congress.
Lots of different things.
Okay.
Guys, you got to know this. I know. Stinky poo. But definitely focus on this chart.
The better you know this, I feel like the more you can do, the better you can do on the FRQs.
Absolutely.
Especially when you get to like the argument FRQ, like it's the more you know about this, the better off you'll be. I don't know how often they're really going to be specific on the multiple choice portion, but the more you know here, the better, the easier it will be for the argument and then some of the other FRQs as well.
Agreed. Whew, so that brings us to agenda setting. Okay, so we kind of talked about this in the last video, that the House and the Senate, they have their own procedures and policies, and they each can set their own agendas when it comes to putting a bill in a committee or hearing a bill on the full chamber floor. And there was a chart in the last video that kind of give you the different procedures in the House and the Senate. Okay, so you can go back and refer to that if you want. But in the House, as we've talked about, they have something called the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee is like the body that decides almost everything. They will set very specific, or I guess they don't have to be specific, but they will set very varying rules on procedures in the House. So again, it differs between the House and the Senate. The House is more specific, is very more structured. The Senate, because they have less people, it's a little bit looser. And then we have something called the Hastert rule, and I have to be honest, I had to look this up.
I don't know that I would have known it off the top of my head.
I didn't know. I had to look it up. So it says the Hastert rule is an informal guiding principle for leaders in the House that dictates a majority of the majority party support any measure before it receives a vote.
So a majority of the majority party has to agree if it was something before it even
goes to the full floor for a vote.
Which is weird. Why would a majority of the majority not support a bill from the majority party?
Who knows? The majority wants to make sure the majority agrees.
Interesting. Actually, that's not interesting at all. I wouldn't really concerned about knowing the Hastert rule. I would be shocked if that popped up on the AP exam.
Same.
So committees at work, meaning like the legislation, again, we just talked about the whole process of how a bill becomes a law. Again, they have to go to the committees first. So you're going to work on a committee. You're going to also be on a subcommittee probably. And in the subcommittee, you're going to do the research. Again, they probably don't do a lot of the research themselves. They have their aides do it. So it goes to the standing committee, whatever appropriate standing committee would be. Like again, going back to agriculture, if there's a bill on farming, or to help farmers, that's going to go to the committee on agriculture. If there's a bill on education, it's going to go to to education, things like that. There's all kinds of standing committees.
Yes.
Only the bills with favorable reports from the subcommittee get full consideration, and so they have to look at all types of bills, and I imagine there's just all kinds of things that they have to get to.
Oh yeah.
So not everyone's going to be good. So they're only going to go to or send forward the ones that they report on favorably. It's like the how a bill becomes a law that we're going to probably watch in class. The video. He's like, I hope they report on me favorably, or else I might die.
He does say that. Die? Yeah, die. That's what he says.
And then floor managers again are going to be people that help out with the general, like the actual floor vote, kind of help people help the House and the Senate floor stay organized. Just like kind of the general workers that are going to help make things a little bit easier.
Very good. Okay, so then that takes us to committees at work when it comes to legislative oversight. And again, I would say that the House performs this function a lot more than the Senate would. And legislative oversight throughout the years has grown tremendously in size and complexity. So I think the divide between the parties probably has had a lot to do with why legislative oversight is at a much larger scale now, because whatever party is in charge, the other party is going to watch them like a hawk and make sure that they're doing things properly.
When people think that that's bad, but like that's the
Right,
that's
but that's
the whole,
part of the government.
It's like their job. Like
we have to make sure that the people who are making the decisions are doing the right thing.
Right.
Okay, so and both sides do this,
and
okay?
also like the party in power, like they aren't gonna. It's gonna be really tough for them to like check themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's like what are you gonna? They don't want, because if they like investigate something in their own party, that could mean that they're not going to win during the next election.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a really like crazy thing. Like what
slope.
What are you loyal to? Are you loyal to your party? Are you loyal to the country? I mean, so that's a really tough job to have.
So another part of oversight is just keeping tabs on the executive branch. So part of the legislative branch is making sure the executive branch and the president are properly carrying out their functions. So the executive branch is tasked with implementing the policies that are created by the legislative branch. So the legislative branch is going to make sure that all these bureaucracies, which are the agencies within the executive branch, are carrying out and properly enforcing these laws that the legislative branch has made. There's little incentive for members of Congress. In what way?
There's just not a lot of there's not a lot of reward for your work.
Yeah.
Like this, I feel like especially like right now, any investigation that you have to, commit, that's not the right word. Any investigation you have to conduct, thank you, is, somebody's going to be mad at you one way or the other. And so that's, it's a thankless job.
Yeah. I mean, people are going to be like, you're attacking the president. Yeah. Anyway, so the majority party determines oversight agenda. So again, whoever has control, and again, mostly the House is going to use legislative oversight, they are going to determine what we're overseeing. They are going to be able to subpoena maybe people who work within the executive branch to come in and testify on, why this policy has not been implemented properly or whatever it might be.
So if you're the president, the golden situation is to have the House and the Senate be a majority of your same party, because then you don't really necessarily have to worry about.
There's very little oversight.
Yeah, they don't care really what. I mean, again, there's going to be some people who are, very ideological, and they are not ideological. Like they are idealistic. They are the ones that are, they maybe have more loyalty towards the country rather than the party, especially if they think the party is doing something illegal. Mm-hmm. But they're not. It's going to be much harder for your own party to investigate you if you're doing anything. So that's why it's so hard to really maintain that. In midterm elections, in the middle of especially the president's first term, there's almost always this wave at the beginning, like that when they get elected, and then there's the opposite wave happens at the midterms. So presidents usually don't enjoy having a non-divided government for very long at all.
I mean, and a great example of this would be the House voting to move forward with an impeachment of Donald Trump. At the end of 2019, it's the Democrats are a majority in the House, and they are overseeing what the executive branch is doing. They conducted an investigation, felt as if the president overstepped his powers, did some illegal activity, so they're going to use their power of legislative oversight to move forward with an impeachment.
Correct, and that's the thing. Like, had the House had been a majority Republican, they probably would have never been able to pass the articles of impeachment unless they had done something really, really bad. Yeah. Like getting into like Nixon, and what he did was just crazy. Like he would have absolutely been the first president to be impeached because impeached and removed because he absolutely broke the law. So anyway, there's just so much other stuff going on. Like politics in general is so interesting, like because it's just the things that are happening behind the scenes in the government.
Right.
My turn?
I think so.
So floor debate and the filibuster. So the filibuster, we talked about that in the last video. It basically allows in the Senate there's an unlimited debate. You can literally talk for as long as you want on a bill. And filibuster, as I mentioned, is when you just get up and you start talking about a bill and you just talk it. You keep talking until the other side just gives up. And they're like, they pull the bill from consideration. The longest one ever was actually over 24 hours. It was Strom Thurmond, and he was filibustering the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Not a good look, Strom.
Yeah, that did not age well. So anyway, lots of other. There's been all kinds of filibusters, and a lot of people think it now might be time to end the filibuster, just because it is really what has kept the government and Congress from really getting anything done. And now, it used to be like if you didn't agree. Or if you didn't like a specific aspect of the bill, you would filibuster. But now it's just like, oh, I don't want the Democrats or the Republicans to pass anything. Like, I don't want them to like get credit for this bill or whatever. And now it's become much more partisan.
So we use the example of Ted Cruz in the last video with Obamacare. And so he filibustered to essentially block it from being passed. It didn't work.
And I feel like Ted Cruz, though, and most Republicans in general, they had their issue was like additional taxation, or the lack of choice, maybe. Yeah. And so there's other issues at work there. But again, the filibuster is really archaic, and it's also not in the Constitution. Yeah. So technically, there is no. It's just been done for centuries now.
But now it's starting to get to the point where it's stopping any progress from happening, and so we probably, as a government, they probably need to go and kind of reevaluate. But
even senators don't want to get rid of it. Like whoever the minority party is, because it really is that's what it is for. It's a good tool. It's a tool to protect the minority party. Mm-hmm. But now some people think that it gives the minority party way too much power. Yeah. Anyway, so there is a way to end a filibuster. It's called cloture vote, and that it takes 3/5 of the Senate in order to do that. That is 60 votes. So if you have that, you can essentially filibusters don't happen anymore. Oh, also, one thing that's interesting about the filibuster, I don't know if you know this, that you actually don't have to filibuster anymore. All you can do, what you can do is you can say, I'm basically motion that you are going to filibuster, and they'll just pull the bill now. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So what? It just saves time.
Yeah, I guess. And so maybe that's one thing that they added to save time, but it still is ridiculous. Just because, I feel like if you're going to filibuster,
so it's like in the MLB when they are going to do an intentional walk. Mm-hmm. We don't have to throw the 4 pitches. We're just going to let the guy take first.
Exactly. And I feel like though if you're gonna be so against a bill, you should really, it's painful. This is painful to do this filibuster and talk for so long. There was a very famous Missouri senator that was filibustering, and she had to pee, and so her colleagues brought up a bucket and a curtain to put around her, and she peed in the bucket, and then the other party had her arrested for public indecency. Anyway, so if you get, whatever. It's up to you guys.
Oh, tool of the minority. We already talked about that.
Hey, look at that. Again, recent rule change. And look at that.
We're way ahead of ourselves.
Gosh, we're good. You're welcome. All right, moving on.
Okay, so unorthodox legislating. Creating legislation and getting it passed has become more difficult for all the things we really just talked about. The lawmaking process in general was purposely set up to be slow and to be drug out because we don't want to live in a country where we're just constantly changing things, right? Change is purposely slow. However, some of these tools that have come up in the last several decades is really making the legislating process just excruciatingly difficult. So some methods of coping with this. The party leaders, so whether it's the minority or the majority party leader, if it's the Speaker of the House, they're going to get involved earlier and more deeply when it comes to legislation. So if a bill is proposed in either of the chambers, they're going to really get to know that bill and the ins and outs of it, and they're going to send it to a very appropriate committee and subcommittee to get work done on that bill. Multiple legislative referrals.
I imagine that means you need more support.
I got it.
More support for each bill.
Yes,
at the beginning.
We don't want a bill introduced that's just a random. Nobody even cares about this. It needs to have maybe several senators on the bill, their names on the bill, saying both sides of the party line agree with this, and we want to introduce it. Special rules from the House Rules Committee. So again, the House Rules Committee has a lot of power when it comes to determining where a bill goes and the rules around debating it. So they can attach special rules to any bill that might help it along the path to become a law. And then, oh God, omnibus legislation.
Got it.
I forgot.
Omnibus legislation is when you like put all kinds of different things into one bill.
Oh, yes.
And then so you get support that way.
Yes.
It's also called log rolling, and it's in different areas. It's like, hey, if you support me on this bill, I'll support you on the next bill. But also, if you can get like, it's like, hey, I need something. I need something in this bill. If you put this in this bill, I'll vote for it.
Right. Good. House party leaders have more leverage. So again, party leaders in the House have a little bit more leverage, especially on the Rules Committee. And again, the majority party decides the chairs on those committees, and they have a lot of power in regards to this committee decisions.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Point 5. Describe the factors that influence how members of Congress make decisions. We're going to talk about presidents in Congress, partners, and protagonists.
Ooh,
wow, so dramatic, Edwards' book. My goodness. Party, ideology, and constituency, and lobbyists and interest groups.
Ugh.
All right, so the first thing that is going to be a big influence on Congress is the president. And the president has his own legislative agenda, and the president is really going to do their best to try to make sure that they get their legislative agenda passed, because that's what's going to allow them to get reelected. And that's what's also weird about the president, is that the president really doesn't have power to get anything done on his own. So he's going to persuade Congress, work at the margins, but usually win. Again, you're going to try to influence as many people around there. Like if the majority leader of the House or the Speaker of the House comes to the president and says, hey, we're really struggling with this, or this, can you talk to them? Like maybe the president can say, hey, next time you are up for re-election, I'll speak at your campaign rally. You know, that's a big vote, especially if it's a popular president. If it's an unpopular president, that doesn't really mean anything. But yeah, if it's a popular president, they're going to want that support so they can get reelected. But again, Congress is really independent of the president, and they have their own agenda. You know, everybody, there's 535 different agendas in
Right.
Congress.
And if you think about it, the president represents an entire country of people, and members in Congress for the House, they are only representing a small portion of a state.
800,000.
Right. And then the Senate is representing just one state. So the different agendas for all those different levels of representation are going to vary dramatically.
And that's what is one of the things that makes it really hard to get anything accomplished. And that's like the lawmaking process in general. We only want to make sure the best laws pass. And even more strict for the amendment process. So it's going to be difficult for, especially I feel like our generation, like the newer generation, is like we want to get things done.
Right.
So we're looking at this archaic system, and we're like, ugh, yikes.
All right, party ideology and constituency. So party influence has a lot to do with lawmaking in general, economic and social welfare policies. So the parties kind of differ on these very specific topics. Conservatives tend to focus a lot more on economic issues. People who lean more liberal would tend to focus more on social issues, social welfare policies. So all these kind of politics play into the different bills that are being introduced and then passed. Ideology and polarized politics. So again, parties are more internally homogenous. Meaning, like if I'm a Democrat, I agree with Democrats.
Yeah, I mean...
And I think the point here is that it used to not be as much divided as we are now. There used to be Republicans that would vote for a Democratic bill. And it's not that it isn't that way anymore, but it's just much more divided in today's world.
And it's been like that since the 70s. The Republicans really tried to get very single-issue groups into their bandwagon. And then now there's that's part of the issue, is that some people vote only because they care about abortion, and that is what that's the only thing they care about. They aren't looking at any other issues. And that's why ideology and party influence, especially, like those are the main factors that determine how you vote. Whatever party you identify with, you're probably going to vote for that party.
Absolutely. And then, and again, in today's world, because of the polarized situation we live in, people are much less likely to compromise. And that is true not only of constituents, not only of Americans in general, but also at the federal level, people that are making our laws and voting to pass laws. Things are very divided. And so that it also plays into like the stalemate aspect of trying to get things done and get things passed and make progress, because it's just very hard when you have such a divided government.
Yeah.
Okay. And then constituency opinion versus member ideology. So have we talked about these yet? Trustee and delegate?
I think we might have mentioned them in the last week. So they might
Okay.
they might know about it, but I'm going to go over it anyway.
Sure. So when it comes to how our members in Congress represent us, they have a couple different ideologies, right? So the first one is called a trustee representation.
Sure.
And
Model of representation.
Trustee model of representation. So that is going to be where we trust, as constituents, our members of Congress to make the best decision for the greater good of everyone. Okay, and so we see that more like in the Senate.
Yep.
Because they're there for 6 years. They represent a larger population of people because they represent an entire state. And so they are trusted to make decisions in Congress, to vote on bills that are going to benefit everyone. And so the opposite side of that then is going to be a delegate model of representation. And this is going to be seen more in the House of Representatives. They serve for 2 years. They're closer to the people. They only represent one district in a state. And so they're going to vote in Congress more on what their constituents want. Okay, and so the idea behind that is they know, again, I go back to the example of people in Florida have different wants and needs than people in California or New York. So those people representing them are going to vote according to what their constituents are really wanting.
And they know that in order to get reelected, since they know the next election is just around the corner in the House, like they have to really follow what their constituents want in order to continue to be reelected. There is a third option called Politico, which they do both. Like if there is on issues that their constituents care about, they use the delegate model, and on issues that their constituents don't care about, they use the trustee model, which really is just kind of like going with your conscience, going with what's best. This was just kind of getting into what Ms. Womack was talking about the increased polarization in Congress. You'll see that they are kind of getting more divided. They were really close. Interesting, like the difference in party ideology within their own parties. So in the 40s, actually, they were pretty far apart. Or not pretty far apart. That's not that far. But you got to think of in the 40s. Oops, sorry about that. That's random. No, go away. In the 40s, like World War II had just ended, and then the Cold War was getting on, so maybe there was just a lot of difference of opinion on how to deal with that.
Yeah, and also that's when we kind of start the Red Scare, and we have people
Well, and then you see here, like getting into the 80s and like late 90s, you see things like terrorism popping up. So maybe as we've gotten more, I'm actually surprised that this is not further when we get. I would have thought the 70s would have been a little bit wider apart too. But I mean, I don't know. So basically, like as it gets higher and higher, there's more differences in the party ideology within the individual parties. Anyway. So lobbyists and interest groups. So we
DC is crawling with lobbyists.
They're like spiders everywhere. Anyway, so that we've talked a little bit about linkage institutions. I believe lobbyists and interest groups are one of those linkage institutions. They connect the government to the people. They, think of things like the NRA, the Sierra Club. I don't know, Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Yes.
Like there's all kinds of interest groups. So anyway, these interest groups, they hire lobbyists, and they are very well paid, and they go to Washington D.C. and all they're there to do is to influence Congress and congressmen to vote according to the interest group's wishes. And that's it. Like, that's all they do. Lobbyists are experts. They are usually like policy experts. They can actually help congressmen a lot of times because congressmen are policy generalists. They know like a little bit about a lot of stuff, whereas lobbyists know a lot about a little. There's 12,000 lobbyists. They spent $3 billion in 2015. Interest groups did and spent $3 billion on lobbyists. And a lot of them are former members of Congress. So a lot of people can, after you're done in Congress, you know how it works. You can now go to work for an interest group and, continue to make probably a pretty good living.
Oh, yeah.
By, really just using that same system. Mm-hmm. Lobbyists persuade in a number of different ways. They can provide policy information, as I just mentioned. They can also provide promises of money. Interest groups influence Congress a lot with campaign donations. Mm-hmm. It is so expensive to run for office in this country. And so you need that money and you need those pledges in order to make sure to keep winning. They can also ghostwrite legislation. Wow. Yeah. You remember Ghostwriter?
I do. It was a show.
Isn't that interesting?
They won't.
You guys are too young for that.
Too young.
But anyway, they can ghostwrite legislation, meaning like they can actually help specific members of Congress to write legislation.
They can literally be like, here, I already wrote this for you.
Yeah.
Put your name on it.
Yep. And they will do that very often.
Yeah.
The status quo usually wins in the sense that, like, this would be a good point to talk about the thing we were talking about guns earlier. Mm-hmm. Like, Ms. Womack and I were talking about how a lot of many Americans support more like common sense gun reform, but because of the power of the National Rifle Association, not a lot ever really gets done.
Right.
And these congressmen are scared to death to even propose gun reform because they know that the NRA is going to be like, see ya, there goes your money.
No more funding for you.
Yeah, it's crazy. Again, there's also disclosure requirements on like how much money you are taking from these interest groups, although it's actually easy to get around a lot of those.
There's ways around it.
Stephen Colbert has a really funny video that we'll talk about super PACs in Unit 4. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Okay, moving to 11.6.
Last one, baby. Let's go.
Congress's role as a representative body. It's fine.
Okay.
Understanding Congress. So we'll talk about Congress and democracy, and then obviously, as we always end, Congress and the scope of government. All right, so Congress and democracy. Democracy depends upon successful representation. We cannot continue as a functioning democracy if we do not have successful representation. We vote for people to represent our interests, our wants, our needs. So in order for democracy to keep functioning, we have to have successful representation. We have to vote for people who are going to get that job done, essentially is what that's saying. Congress, unrepresentative. Okay, so a lot of the times when we look at members of Congress, and I would say more in the Senate.
I mean, I think you could probably argue both.
But Congress members tend to be what we would consider elites. They generally are very educated. They probably had a little bit of money before they even made it into Congress. Sometimes people call the Senate the millionaires club because a lot of them are. And so does that necessarily represent the American population as a whole? Maybe not. Definitely not. So that's a kind of a tough line.
Well, if you think about like if Ms. Womack and myself wanted to run for office, like we don't have any money like to do that. Like, and so now there's almost this like a kind of a hidden requirement to run for office that you kind of have to be wealthy, or maybe even have parents that are wealthy,
or some kind of wealthy connections. Yeah. And then leadership is chosen, not elected. So another kind of issue to bring up. We elect the people that is in Congress, but then congressional members choose who's going to lead them. And again, it's depending on who's in power and whatnot. It can vary on who's elected, and that can be scary.
Well, they might not choose the person who would be best for the job.
Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Senate is based on states, not population. So again, I usually use the example of California. California has a population of 55 million people, right?
Yep, I think that. Don't quote me on that.
So is one, there's two people representing California in the Senate. Are those two people really going to represent the best interest of all 55 million people in California? California has such a diverse population that it's kind of hard to see how that would be an accurate representation of it. Okay, obstacles to good representation then. Constituent service, meaning people don't vote?
Well, I would say the more you do for your constituents, the
Oh,
more
yeah.
likely you are. Okay. I'm
Do you
sorry.
think?
Yeah. So if you're more concerned about serving your constituents and doing things for your constituents, you may not be representing them well. Like you're
Right.
not spending enough time in Congress, maybe
Right, yeah.
getting things done. Who knows?
And then re-election campaigns. So these are a monster. Again, we've talked heavily about how much money it is required to raise and spend to even get a foot in the door. So these re-election campaigns it's just such an ongoing process, especially in the House of Representatives. You're elected for 2 years. So it's like almost immediately you are sworn into office and then you have to start your fundraising campaign again so that you can raise enough money for your next election in 2 years. So that also can be an obstacle. And then representativeness versus effectiveness. There's going to be a difference between if I'm a member in the House, I can represent your interests, but am I effective in getting policies made that are going to help you move forward or help you solve issues that you have in whatever state or district you're living in?
And then if they're effective, do we really care how representative they are?
Absolutely.
So it's another issue of you kind of have a trade-off there.
Right.
All right. Finishing up here, this Congress and the scope of government. Does the size of government increase to please the public? The thing about a lot of people don't like that the government is so large. So, but the trade-off is if you decrease the size of government, the government is not going to be able to provide for you as well. And this is we talked a little bit about. Actually, we'll talk a little bit about entitlements later, and Social Security and things like that. But pork barrel spending is really where this really rears its ugly head. All of the congressmen are trying to get things done for their district or their state, and we all want things done, but at the same time, why does the government need to be so large? Especially the bureaucracy now is larger than it's ever been. And it's very inefficient in some respects, and it's very difficult to even oversee such a large organization. So there's a lot of other issues that kind of it's a big trade-off, like I mentioned earlier. Also, we have contradictory preferences. People who are against large governments in some cases, but they are for individual programs. I feel like it's just hard to really find a balance here. We want the government to provide for us as Americans. However,
but we don't want them interfering in our lives too much.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so you have to find this balance. And again, it really does depend on your ideology a lot. But I think that you could really find on either side of the aisle people that are definitely going to be contradictory in what they want the government to do. And what a nightmare for the government. You cut my funding, but you still want me to provide you with X, Y, and Z. How am I going to do that? It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, guys, we did it.
We did it.
We're all done. Appreciate you. We'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy.